The doctor looked me in the eye and gave me 6 months to live. I walked out of that clinic terrified, needing my husband more than ever. But when I came home early, I found his phone on the counter. He was texting his mistress, not about my health, but calculating how many millions he'd inherit the moment my heart stopped. He thought I was going to fade away quietly. He had no idea I was about to rewrite every single line of my estate before the sun went down. My name is Jessica, and I'm 28 years old. Up until 3 months ago, I thought I had the picture-perfect life, a rewarding career, 2 beautiful children, and a loving husband named Mark, whom I had been with since college. But life has a way of shattering your reality in a single afternoon. It started in the sterile, fluorescent-lit office of my oncologist. Sitting in that uncomfortable vinyl chair, watching the doctor sigh as he flipped through my charts, felt like watching a movie of someone else's life. He looked up with sympathetic eyes and delivered the diagnosis. It was severe, it was aggressive, and it meant I was facing the fight of my life. My mind raced straight to my kids and my family's legacy. My late father had left me a substantial estate, including properties and liquid assets, specifically meant to secure my family's future. Terrified and clutching the packet of medical records, I drove home early, desperately needing Mark's shoulder to cry on. I unlocked the front door and called out his name, but the house was dead silent. I walked into the kitchen to grab a glass of water, and that's when I saw it. Mark's phone lying face up on the marble counter, vibrating continuously with new notifications. I didn't mean to pry, but a preview popped up on the screen that made my breath catch in my throat. I picked it up and scrolled through a string of recent messages. What I found was a 2-year-old affair with a woman he worked with. But the physical betrayal wasn't even the worst part. As I scrolled further back, my eyes landed on text messages sent just days prior, where Mark was casually discussing my family's wealth, asking his mistress if she thought my estate would pass entirely to him if anything ever happened to me, and openly speculating on how they could spend it. Standing there in my quiet kitchen, holding my diagnosis in one hand and my husband's heartless betrayal in the other, something inside me didn't break. It turned to ice. I put Mark's phone back on the counter in the exact spot I'd found it, aligning the edge with the marble tile. My hands weren't shaking anymore. My mind was operating with a cold, absolute clarity I hadn't known I possessed. Confronting him right then would have felt satisfying for about 10 seconds, but it would have given away all my power. If Mark knew I had discovered his affair, he would immediately consult a lawyer, try to secure his grip on our joint accounts, or attempt to manipulate the legal system while I was weak and distracted by my medical treatments. I needed time, and I needed him completely off guard. When Mark finally walked through the front door an hour later, I was sitting at the dining table with my medical folder neatly tucked inside my tote bag. He put on a masterclass of performative concern, hugging me tight, kissing my forehead, and asking how my doctor's appointment went. I looked him dead in the eye and gave him a sanitized version of the truth, that the doctors found an issue, but we were still doing tests and figuring out a treatment plan. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched him like a hawk while playing the role of a worried, dependent wife. He thought he was being subtle, but I noticed every single calculated move he made. He started bringing up our financial life during dinner, casually asking if my father's family trust had any specific conditions, or if I had updated my life insurance policies recently. Every time he asked, he squeezed my hand with a soft, sympathetic smile, pretending it was just responsible planning for the family. Meanwhile, every night after Mark fell asleep, I was awake in the dark, meticulously documenting everything. I took high-resolution photos of his text logs, downloaded digital statements for every bank account, and gathered deeds to all the real estate properties my father had left me. I compiled proof of his 2-year affair, including receipts for hotel stays and expensive gifts he had purchased using our joint funds. By the time I was ready to make my next move, I had a bulletproof digital archive of his betrayal. Mark thought he was setting a trap for me. He had no idea I was the one building a wall around him. The next morning, while Mark thought I was at a routine blood test, I walked into the office of one of the top estate attorneys in the city. I placed my medical diagnosis, my father's original estate documents, and a thumb drive containing all the proof of Mark's financial deception on her desk. I told her clearly that I was about to fight for my health, but before I stepped into a hospital for treatment, I needed to make sure my children's future was completely protected. My attorney carefully reviewed everything and mapped out a strategy that would completely insulate my assets from Mark. Under her guidance, we completely restructured my inheritance. We created an irrevocable family trust, transferring every property, investment account, and piece of my father's estate directly into it. The trust was legally set up exclusively for my children, ensuring that the funds could only be used for their education, healthcare, and future living expenses. To make sure Mark couldn't attempt to manipulate or influence the decision-making process, we named a neutral, independent corporate trustee to oversee the assets. Mark was completely removed as a beneficiary, trustee, or executor. By the time I signed the final legal documents, my family's wealth was locked behind a bulletproof legal vault. Even if the worst happened to me, Mark wouldn't be able to touch a single dollar for himself or his mistress. With my legal defenses firmly in place, I turned my full focus toward my health. I started my treatment protocol, enduring exhausting days of medical procedures and recovery. Through it all, I maintained a completely calm exterior at home. Mark continued his performative routine, acting like the attentive husband whenever he thought it served his interests. But behind his warm smiles, I could see his growing impatience. He would drop subtle hints, asking if I had finished setting up my medical directives or if I needed him to sign any financial paperwork on my behalf. He was waiting for the moment he would take control of my estate, completely unaware that his access had already been legally severed. Playing the role of the oblivious wife required incredible mental discipline. While my body was fighting an internal battle, my mind had to stay sharp, ensuring I didn't drop a single hint about what I had done. Every time Mark feigned sympathy, I reminded myself of the texts on his phone and the future I was protecting for my children. The knowledge that my family's legacy was safe gave me an unexpected surge of resilience, keeping me grounded and composed through every single step of my recovery. 3 months into my treatment, my scans showed incredible progress. The therapy was working, and my doctors were optimistic. It was time to pull the curtain back. Mark came home that evening carrying a manila folder, looking pleased with himself. He sat down at the dining room table and pushed a stack of papers toward me. Joint account consolidation forms and a power of attorney agreement that would give him total control over my finances. He smiled warmly, took my hand, and said, "Honey, given everything you're going through, it's just safer if I manage the estate and accounts for you." I looked at the documents, then looked up at him and smiled back. "I won't be signing those, Mark." He blinked, caught off guard. "Jessica, don't be unreasonable. If something happens, my children are completely taken care of," I interrupted calmly, pulling 2 thick envelopes from my bag and placing them on the table. "And as for you, you're free to move out tonight." He opened the first envelope. It wasn't the signature he expected. It was a full set of divorce papers citing irreconcilable differences and financial misconduct, complete with color printouts of his 2 years of text messages with his mistress. His face flushed bright red, then turned dead pale. "What is this?" he stammered, his voice rising. "You can't do this. Half of everything you have, your father's estate, is marital property. I have rights." I slid the second envelope across the table. "That's the irrevocable trust agreement drafted by my attorney last month. Every single property, investment, and asset my father left me has been legally transferred into an untouchable trust for our kids. You aren't a trustee, you aren't an executor, and you aren't getting a dime." Mark stared at the legal documents in absolute shock, his hands trembling as he realized the trap he thought he had set had completely snapped shut on him instead. Mark didn't give up without a fight. Over the next 6 months, while I continued my treatments and regained my health, his attorneys attempted every legal maneuver in the book to crack the trust open. They argued that the restructuring was done in bad faith and tried to claim a right to my father's assets as part of the divorce settlement. But my legal team had built an impenetrable wall. Because the inheritance was kept strictly separate from our joint finances and legally transferred before any divorce was filed, the court held that Mark had zero right to a single cent of my family's wealth. When the judge formally reviewed the evidence of his financial manipulation alongside the ironclad trust documents, he dismissed Mark's claims entirely. Not only did Mark walk away with nothing from my father's estate, but he was also ordered to pay back thousands of dollars in joint funds he had secretly funneled toward his affair over the previous 2 years. Watching him stand in that courtroom, stripped of his pretenses and facing financial accountability for his own actions, was a moment of absolute vindication. Today, my life looks entirely different. My latest medical scans came back completely clear, and my doctors have declared me in full remission. The battle for my health was hard, but it taught me a level of resilience I never knew I possessed. My children's financial future is completely secured, shielded inside an untouchable trust that will support their education and dreams for decades to come. As for Mark, he got exactly what he earned. He lives in a small rented apartment, stripped of the lifestyle he tried so desperately to claim for himself. Walking through my home now, surrounded by peace and clarity, I don't feel anger toward the past. I feel grateful for the strength that kicked in when I needed it most. Discovering a betrayal when you're at your most vulnerable can feel like the end of the world, but it doesn't have to be. I chose to turn my worst moment into my greatest victory, protecting my kids, reclaiming my life, and proving that no one can ever take away your power unless you let them.